I'm here with Geoff Atkins, a principal at Finity Consulting. I'm going to ask him a few questions at the Actuary Summit. We just heard about some of the career lessons of Trevor Matthews, Melinda Howes and Fred Rowley. I wanted to ask you, Geoff, can you share a lesson or two that you've learnt from working in the actuarial profession?
Look, I know this is really ancient history, but the first thing that came to my mind was 1984. I worked for a life insurance company, now TAL in fact, and I got put on a computer design project. And I pretty much had a nervous breakdown. I didn't want to go to work, whatever. I needed to do something. My now wife said, just go and get a different job. So I had a look and I went off to consulting, to general insurance, to a four-man firm, and here I am 30 years later doing exactly the same job. I think I've had 6 different company names, but doing exactly the same job. And of course, 10 or 15 years later, I was diagnosed with depression, which made complete sense looking backwards. But you know, just experiencing that kind of that mental health component, which is a common part of many people's lives, and how that played into my present job.
So what's the message? What's the great lesson that you learned out of all that experience?
Ask for help.
Ask for help, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't take on too much.
When the guys were talking about, you know, what happens when you get to the tough times,
Yeah.
you know, the tough go shopping kind of situation. To me, it's talk about it to a couple of selected people. Always makes, to me, I find it makes such a big difference. A problem shared is a problem halved.
Yeah, and you're not alone. Onto an issue in the industry. You talked about a cold war going on in the superannuation field at the moment. What did you mean by that?
Look, so I'm old, as you can tell. When I was a youngster, superannuation was employer provided. And then Paul Keating, world's greatest treasurer, brought in compulsory industry super. Originally it was 3% contribution. And from that time, a whole new part of the industry was spawned, the industry super funds, spawned straight out of the trade union movement and very closely aligned with the trade union movement. Now that's a long time ago, but it still has certain amounts of that heritage in certain of the funds. And the people who ran the more commercial funds, these are all sort of mutual organisations, the people that ran the commercial funds and do run the commercial funds, I just think that they still feel rather bitter about it. They feel like the industry funds have sort of taken advantage of their preferred position back when things are developing. They still complain about preference in the Fair Work legislation. But these people have matured. They've lived together for, I guess, 20 years. So you don't hear them saying that so much, which is why I think of it as a Cold War.
Geoff, yourself and Brad Parry were recently seconded onto the FSI Secretariat, the David Murray Inquiry, and the contribution that Actuaries made to that was outstanding. Can you tell us why, in particular, the actuarial contribution was so valuable?
Okay. To me, 3 things. Firstly, after a little bit of developing confidence of our masters, Brad and I were allowed to go and talk to actuaries as much as we wanted, selectively to individual people. And I must have had 10 or a dozen individual conversations, really drawing people out on their ideas and pros and cons of different things. And so we were able to incorporate a huge amount of knowledge from those actuaries without getting into any politics, without going public. So it was really tapping into that huge expertise. And then our audience, our masters in the Secretariat and the people on the committee just said on several topics, superannuation, or retirement income was the main one, but not only, they said, we're astonished. The actuaries know what they're talking about. They get right down to the nitty-gritty. They get to the nub of the problem, and we can trust what they say. There's no sign of self-interest. We know many of them work in these industries and their jobs might depend on it, but when they come and talk to us, they're able to put all that behind them and really get across that they're thinking and giving input for the public good.
And that's why it's important that they get involved in public policy work in general.
Look, it's an advantage if you can carry that reputation. You know, actuaries are not widely known. A few bureaucrats and people will sort of come across them from time to time. But if you can carry that reputation, you'll be more likely to be invited in rather than sending in a submission and trying to beat the doors down to be heard.
Okay, thanks for your time, Geoff.
You're welcome.